Congressman-elect Bernie Sanders, independent, Vermont at-large seat. In your former role as the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, you were in Washington many times and working on a variety of issues. What is it like coming here as a congressman-elect?
Well, it seems that it takes about 2 days to find out where the bathrooms are. The bureaucracy is enormous, and what is being thrown at us, I think, necessarily is all kinds of information as to how you put together your office, how you make sure that you obey all the rules and you don't go to jail for taking gifts that you shouldn't take and all these other things. So the first impression is an enormous amount of information that's being thrown at you. You're meeting all kinds of people. You're concentrating on trying to get onto the committees of your choice. In my case, there was a problem of whether or not I would be within the Democratic caucus or not, and that took a lot of work and effort. You're being bombarded, in our case, by at least several hundred people who would like jobs, by many people in the media who would like interviews. So it's been, to say the very least, an exhilarating and interesting week.
Have you been bombarded more than most or less than most because of your independent status?
In terms of job applications, I don't know. I suspect that in all of the cubbies that I saw there, the large numbers of applications. I think in terms of the media, we've probably gotten more interest.
If you could explain to the audience a little bit of the behind-the-scenes maneuvering on the question of whether or not you would join the Democratic caucus.
Okay, I was elected as an independent. I served 4 terms as mayor of the city of Burlington, Vermont, which is the largest city in our state, as an independent. And in fact, Burlington, Vermont today is the only 3-party city in the United States of America where independents and progressives have done very well against Democrats and Republicans. I ran as an independent in this election, received 56% of the vote. The Republican candidate received about 40%, and the Democratic candidate received 3%. Having won as an independent and intending very firmly to remain as an independent, the first concern that I had is, how do I make sure that I get good committee assignments which represent the needs of my state? And what I had pledged the people of Vermont during the campaign is that I would make request entry into the Democratic caucus, because I wanted to make sure that I was not pushed aside and put on irrelevant committees. I am not a Democrat, but clearly of the 2 caucuses, my political philosophy is much closer to the progressive wing of the Democratic Party than clearly to the Republican Party. And that was what I campaigned on. In fact, during this last week here, the Democratic caucus and party has been very generous to me in allowing me to attend a number of the panel discussions in some of the functions and so forth. But for a variety of reasons, they have made the decision that I will not be accepted into the Democratic caucus. On the other hand, what has evolved, which is absolutely satisfactory to me, is their willingness to say, okay, Bernie, we will treat you the same as we will any Democrat in terms of committee assignments. So I will put forth my requests. They will assign me essentially to the committee of my choice, and I can't complain. So I'm happy about that. I will accrue seniority. So I think the agreement is a satisfactory one.
Are there any other aspects of being the lone independent in Congress that that you see as a downside?
I think in many ways the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. I think not being a member of the Democratic caucus and getting the committee assignments, the advantage is I don't have a party hierarchy on top of me, and it gives me a little bit more freedom to speak out on all of the issues. I think that by and large in this country today there is a growing anger and frustration not only at Congress, who people feel is not representing them, but at the 2-party system. I think there was a poll recently which indicated that something like 53% of Americans don't know the difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. So being on the outside, I have a little bit more freedom to be critical of the leadership of both parties.
We want to go to the phones just as soon as we can for Congressman-elect Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont. 202-628-2525 for viewers watching in the Eastern or Central time zones. 202-783-2727 for those of you watching in the Mountain or Pacific time zones. Not your first try to come to Washington. You're here now, 1991. What do you hope to accomplish?
Well, I'll tell you, Susan. We could spend 6 hours talking about all of the problems that exist in this country. I mean, the crisis in health care, the fact that we have 15% of our population without any health insurance, the collapse of our educational system, the fact that we are spending $300 billion on the military despite the fact that the Cold War is over, the growing gap between the rich and the poor. I can go on and on. The fact that much of America is owned and controlled by relatively few people. But I'll tell you honestly what I think the most important problem is, and where I want to play at least some role. And that is that the average American, to a significant degree, is giving up on government. To me, the major crisis that we face is that in this last election, as you know, about 60% of the people, when given the choice of the Democratic and Republican parties in Congress, didn't vote at all. You know, all of us are dismayed that in South Africa, for example, black people can't vote. How many of us know that in this country, poor people don't vote anymore? The last election, presidential election in 1988, you had 50% of the people not choosing to vote for the caucus or Bush. You have a situation in this era of anti-incumbency, throw the bums out. 96% of these guys got reelected. So the basic issue is how do you reinvigorate democracy? How to make the average working person, the elderly person, the poor person say, you know what, this is my government. Those people in Washington listen to me, they are representing my interest, and they're not just standing with the rich and the powerful against me. Now, how do you do that? That has to do with the media, who owns and controls the media. It has to do with the two-party system. It has to do with campaign financing and the fact that many of the candidates are heavily indebted to wealthy people and corporations who buy them, who buy politicians and buy elections. So how we can begin the serious discussion, the national debate that we need, which says, where do we want to go as a country? Who has the power in this country? How do we democratize all of our institutions? How do we give working people power over their own lives? You know, we freed the slaves a long, long time ago, but in many respects, and I don't mean to be rhetorical about it, the average working person today has very little rights. Corporations announce a worker comes to work on a Friday, and the corporation says, oh, by the way, we're moving to Mexico. You worked for our company 30 years, here's a few bucks. You have no power to say, you don't have any power over your job. So I think the major challenge we face is not only a redistribution of wealth, which is important, but a redistribution of power, making the average American feel, this is my country, this is a democracy. I can shape the future. The people don't feel that now. They sit down, they watch the tube for 40 or 50 hours a week, they hold their nose, they vote for the lesser of two evils. Now that to me is the major problem, and once we can begin to deal with that problem, I think other things will follow.
Is Washington set up to handle big picture questions?
No, my impression is that it's not. I think God, you see the problem, not even I'm talking about a we. I think the system is compartmentalized into hundreds of different little areas, each of which are important. I don't mean to suggest that they're not. Every committee is dealing with billions of dollars here and billions of dollars there. But I don't know that the Congress itself is saying, for example, the first question that I think the President of the United States should ask the American people is, why don't you have any faith in us? Why don't you vote? Why don't you participate? Why do you have such contempt for government? And I think we should, as a Congress, be dealing with that issue. How do you make the people, once again, have faith in their country and in their government? Does the Congress do that? I don't think so.
Gloucester County, Virginia, you're on the air.
Bernie Sanders. Hello.
Yes,
Hello.
Go ahead.
Yes, I hesitate to address you by Mr. Sanders. We did meet many years ago in Vermont. And first of all and foremost and most importantly, I want to congratulate you 1,010% for winning under an independent label. This is one who has voted forever for all the losers registering as an independent, etc., etc. Also understanding so well what you stand for and wishing to give you some encouragement to, whatever it takes, fight that socialist label. I was a native-born Scandinavian. I know what it means to be a social democrat. I know the humanity, etc., therein. And I know what you are trying to do, and I just wish you so very, very well, and I hope we can keep in touch.
Thank you. Why don't we let you go at that point? Thanks for the call. A lot of callers on the line.
Okay. Well, I think the caller, when you asked what I want to accomplish, I think clearly one of the things also that I want to do is to make the concepts of democratic socialism, that is not authoritarian communism, it has nothing to do with it, part of the serious discussion that perhaps takes place in this country. Because I think if you look at the two-party system and the ideology, they're about separated by about a half an inch. And we need a much broader discussion of the causes of our problems and the solutions to our problems. So if we can inject some discussion as to what democratic socialism might mean, what goes on in Scandinavia, what has gone on social democratic countries in Western Europe. If I can play some role in doing that, I think I'll have accomplished something.
Orlando.
Hi.
Hello.
I don't think that you have to apologize for being a socialist, but I certainly would like to know how you can apologize for being the son-in-law of Representative Lantos of California.
Well, I think you have the wrong guy. If I'm not mistaken, Congressman Lantos happens to be no relationship to me at all. If I am not mistaken, I believe the newly elected congressman from New Hampshire is the son-in-law of Congressman Lantos. So you got the wrong guy, for better or worse.
Okay, thanks. Do you have another question? All right, we lost that caller. Your specific committee assignments that you want to have are what?
The three major committees that I have requested to be on are Commerce and Energy. My understanding is it's very difficult for any freshman to get on that one. I want that one, if possible, because of my concern and desire to see a national healthcare system established in this country. They deal with healthcare. The other committee is Education and Labor, for the obvious reasons. We have back home the support of vast majorities of the working people and of the unions, and I want to fight to improve the life of working people. Education clearly is an enormous issue for our teachers back home, for our parents, and for the kids. And the third committee that I'm looking at is Banking, Finance, and Urban Affairs. As a former mayor, that's of interest to me. And given the the virtual collapse of the savings and loan industry, the problems in the commercial banks, and raising the issue of what in fact should be the responsibility of the banking industry to the communities in which they serve is of great interest to me also. So those are some of the major committees that I'm interested in.
Portland, Oregon.
Good evening, Mr. Sanders. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Part of the problem that those of us who watch a lot of C-SPAN have is the process of being introduced to the Congress as a new member. Meetings you get to go to. There's a seminar at Harvard, I guess, and there used to be all that kind of thing. And I was wondering, you've kind of alluded to it, but do you have a sense now of the kind of grind that starts to happen to people when they come to this burg?
I think it's a very good question. I think what happens, and I don't really think it's anybody's fault per se. I mean, I think the Congress is fairly trying to give an orientation to the new members, tell you what to expect, give you briefings on the major issues. I think what your question asked, though, is there a process by which newcomers get sucked into the old way of doing business, into the status quo way of doing business? And I think not that it's intentional on the part of the leadership, but I think that goes on. As a matter of fact, I was teaching last year at the Kennedy School at Harvard, so I have some familiarity with that process, and I'll be there next week part of the time, and part of the time I'll be back in Vermont. I think for me, one of the very exciting aspects of having been elected is that I am going to be able to be making contact and depending to a significant degree upon a lot of very fine minds who are not usually allowed to have much of an impact on the Congress. And I'm very excited about that, whether it's people like Barry Commoner or Jesse Jackson, or people who have been active in the peace movement or in the women's movement, people who very often have been on the outside. I'm going to be looking to very significantly to try to bring inside the Congress and get ideas introduced that are often not heard.
New York City.
Hi, Bernie. Congratulations for breaking that stranglehold of the Republicans and the Democrats. We really need to see that. And I'd really like to have your opinion on, your sort of suggestions on how more people can do this. What's your background in terms of organizing yourself, your political base in Vermont? Is it just something that was possible because it was in Vermont, or is this possible outside of a state like that?
I think it's possible in any and every state in the country, and I think it's possible in every city in the country. I think the major approach that one has got to go, the direction that one has got to go, is to begin to understand that it is not impossible, in fact, to be victorious. You know, very often I talk to people and they say, oh, the mayor in my town, he's a terrible person, but we can't take them on. We're not powerful enough to take them on. I think what we did in Vermont and what we did in Burlington 10 years ago is just start articulating the issues that face the people of your community. In other words, what's so amazing is that people seem to do everything else but sit down and ask the very dumb bunny questions about what's going on in their community. So you ask the hard questions, articulate the real issues, and work very, very hard. We have been successful in Burlington and in the state of Vermont because we work very hard. In this last campaign, we put together, I would say, a good 1,000 volunteers who knocked on, well, just tens of thousands of doors, passed out the literature. But I think the main point that I want to make is that it is not as complicated as people think it is. The average American today is very angry, is disgusted with politics as usual. I think the job of those of us who are progressives is simply to articulate forcefully the issues within our community, in our country. You know, people say, you know, you're crazy, you can't talk about those issues. You can talk about those issues. We have got to redefine the nature of discussion. Our position should be that it is the Congress which is not talking about the real issues. And we have got to just do that.
One advantage it might seem that Vermont might have is buying media time. Less expensive to do that in Vermont than people in major market areas.
There is truth to that, and that is true, and it is also true that, you know, the city of Burlington, where I was mayor for 8 years, has only 40,000 people. It is a lot harder to become mayor of New York or Los Angeles. But on the other hand, there are resources that people have in large cities that we did not have in the state of Vermont. But the main point that I want to make over and over again is I think the average political activist would be very, very surprised to know that when you begin the process of knocking on doors, people are going to start nodding their heads. They can say, you're right, those people are way out of touch. You have my support.
Pittsburgh.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening.
Yes, to Mr. Sanders, congratulations. I was really happy to see that you were able to get in. I've seen, and a lot of people have seen what's happened since Reagan came into office with the supply side economics. And so my comment is this, and then you can make a comment, is that I really don't feel that Jesus Christ would be a capitalist. If anything, Jesus Christ was concerned with the cares trying to help people. So I'm going to hang up and let you make a comment.
Well, I don't want to get into a religious discussion, but I think that any person who has a deep sense of humanity must understand that there is something fundamentally wrong when you have some people in our country who have billions and billions of dollars in personal wealth, who live in the fanciest houses, who drive around in these stretch limousines, and their brothers and sisters are sleeping out in the street. When the gap between the rich and the poor is growing wider, when we live in a world today where today 30,000 children in the third world have starved to death. And I think, getting back to the original discussion, these are some of the philosophical issues that this country must debate. Is it morally acceptable that some people have so much, they're not going to spend it in 100 lifetimes, and other people have nothing? Where some people have so much power, and other people are powerless. And I fear, as the question that you asked a few moments ago, those are not the issues that are debated by Congress. And I think this nation, not only in Congress, we need to debate these issues in our unions, in our farm organizations, in the schools of America. Where do we want to go? Are we happy with the general direction of this country? And I think when we start asking those questions, one would be quite surprised that many Americans, I think, are not happy with the direction that this country is going in.
We have about 20 minutes left in our conversation with Bernie Sanders. This evening, our 90-minute program is devoted to introducing you to some of the newly elected members of Congress. Tucson, Arizona, you're next.
Mr. Sanders, you ran on the ticket in Vermont as an independent. Would it not have been more honest if you had run as a socialist, in as much as I believe you consider yourself an avowed socialist? Am I correct?
Well, you're correct that I ran as an independent. I'm not quite sure what an avowed socialist, if you mean, am I avowing it to you right now? Yeah, I am a democratic socialist. I think my response is that I am also an independent. And politically what that means is I'm not a Democrat and I'm not a Republican. In terms of why didn't I run as a socialist? Because I'm not a member of a socialist party. I'm not a member of any socialist organization. I'm an independent socialist. But I think your question then, a similar question might be asked of Democrats and Republicans, and say to them, do they run as Democrat/capitalists or Republican capitalists? Socialism, to me, democratic socialism, is a philosophical outlook. It is what I am, and I don't apologize for it. But politically, I function as an independent, and that's what I am in Congress.
Durham, North Carolina.
Yes. Mr. Sanders, are you there?
Yes, I'm right here.
I would like to ask you, in terms of the retrenchment of socialism all over the world, notwithstanding your comments about Scandinavia, how you can purport to go to Congress as a socialist and basically use flag words like redistribution of wealth and basically say that those who work hard throughout their lives, and by the way, I'm not powerful or wealthy, and take from those who choose to work and work hard throughout their working lives, and those who choose through no fault of their own and in less fortunate circumstances, and basically go against the work ethic in this country.
Okay, thanks.
Well, let me respond to that. What is in clear decline, and thank God it's in decline, I'm delighted to see it in decline, is authoritarian communism, which to me has nothing to do at all with democratic socialism. Authoritarian communism has been a vicious political system which over its length of time has resulted in the murder of many, many millions of people. As an economic system, it has not succeeded, and I'm delighted to see its demise. That has nothing to do with democratic socialism. Now, we can argue the achievements or lack of achievements of France, which has a socialist president, as you know, Sweden, which has had a social democratic government for 51 out of the last 57 years, which has a national health care system, relatively low unemployment, which has free college education for its people, young people, which has a 90% voter turnout. It has its problems, okay? We could argue the merits or demerits of Austria and other social democratic countries. We could argue how the New Democratic Party is going to be doing in Ontario, a social democratic party that won a victory just a few months ago in Canada. But the first point that I want to make is what I believe in has nothing to do with communism, and I'm delighted to see the decline of communism. I think we can talk about, if we're going to broaden the discussion, we could also look at how capitalism, if you like, laissez-faire capitalism, has done in this country. What it has resulted in right now is a collapse of a healthcare system. It's not only that 15% of our people have no health insurance, but you're looking at tens of millions of people who are frightened to go to the doctor or to the hospital because they can't afford health care and what the bill might be. And we are one of 2 industrialized nations in the world that do not have a national health care system. You could talk about a system in which we are now $3 trillion in debt. That's our national debt. Throw another $1 trillion on top of it for the savings and loan fiasco, so that every one of our kids now is deeply in debt. That's not a particularly positive system. A system in which now we have 3 million people sleeping out on the streets. A system in which millions of our kids are dropping out of school. We have a 25% dropout rate in high school. So I think there are many very serious problems within our country that are going to have to be addressed. And I think a democratic socialist model might be an effective way to start approaching some of those problems. To me, I should tell you that for a start, what I would be very satisfied with, within my definition of what democratic socialism is about, is just a couple of things. For a start, national health care. We must determine as a nation whether all of our people are entitled to health care, or we're going to continue the health care system on the free market approach, okay, the profit motive. You want health care, you have the money, you can get the best health care you want in this country. You don't have the money, you get nothing. I think that that's wrong. So I believe as a democratic socialist in the concept of a national health care system, similar to what goes on in Canada as it happens. In terms of being a democratic socialist, I believe that all of our people, all of our young people, should be given equal opportunity for the best quality education that they can get. It is an outrage that the best colleges in this country now cost $20,000, $23,000 a year. Many working class, low-income kids can no longer afford to go to college. That many low-income communities in this country are not providing their kids with decent elementary or high school education. We must have quality education for all of our kids. In terms of other basic necessities of life, we're talking about housing. All right? It's not just that 2 or 3 million people are sleeping out on the street, but that many of our people, working people, are paying 30, 40, 50% of their limited incomes for housing. So for a start, what I mean by being a democratic socialist is that this nation can afford and must afford to provide the basic necessities of life to all of our people. That's healthcare. That's education. That's housing, for a start.
Murray, Kentucky.
Yes, I'm a first-time caller of
Glad to have you.
And I enjoy the C-SPAN program very much. I'd like to ask two questions of Representative Sanders. One is his opinion of whether it's fair or even proper for a panel of senators to determine the guilt or innocence of other senators' potential wrongdoing in the so-called Keating 5 hearing, whether it's proper. It's something, to me, it seems similar to a potential, an accused bank robber of being accused of being judged by potential bank robbers, you might say, okay? I haven't heard anybody bring up that point in these hearings, that whether it's fair or even proper for senators to be determining the guilt or innocence of other senators. The other question I had of Representative Sanders is, how is it different? What is the difference between a socialist and a communist, as far as, is there a difference between the two?
All right, thank you, sir. Appreciate the call.
Yeah, I've tried to differentiate the difference in terms of the latter question.
And he may have been calling in at that exact time and may not have heard the answer.
Basically, communism is an authoritarian form of government which does not respect people's civil rights or right to participate in a democratic political system. Democratic socialism encourages that participation. So you have countries which have social democratic countries have a far higher turnout in terms of voter participation than does the United States of America. We have, in fact, one of the serious problems that I want to try to address is that we have now far and away the lowest voter turnout of any industrialized democracy in the world. So they're entirely different systems. In terms of the so-called DeConcini 5, that process, as I understand it, not being an expert on it, I think the Senate is now seeing whether or not these members have violated the rules of the Senate, and I suspect that that is proper.
Next call comes from Rohnert Park, California.
Hello, yeah, this is Bob Bancroft, and I live in Frank Riggs' district, and he failed to mention that the Peace and Freedom Party got 15% in that election, so I think there's more independents out there than are mentioned. But my question to you is about the problem of health care in this country, because my fiance and I are both employed full-time. We can't afford it, and I think that's something that you're looking at addressing in this Congress.
Okay. Let me be, when I campaigned for office in Vermont, there was no issue that I talked about more than the crisis in our healthcare system, the fact that it's out of control, and that we need to do what virtually the entire industrialized world is doing. We are the odd people out. Our system is considered throughout the world to be the weird and strange system. Throughout most of the industrialized world, in fact, with the exception of South Africa, every other industrialized democracy has, in one form or another, a national healthcare system which says, if you are a citizen of this country, you are entitled to all of the health care you need with virtually no out-of-pocket expense. Now, the beauty of national health care in this country is that we can have national health care without having to spend more money than the current $650 billion we're spending on the non-system that is presently in existence. And the reason for that is that if you have a national health care system similar to what goes on in Canada, you can do away with about $70 billion in terms of billing expenses, in terms of profit-taking, in terms of bureaucracy. You go into a Canadian hospital, you give them their card, you don't get billed anymore. There aren't 50 people in the basement of that hospital figuring out whether you have Blue Cross, Blue Shield, or Connecticut General dunning you when you're late paying the bills. You don't have people working in doctors' offices worrying about how they're going to get paid. Everybody gets paid. It's the same system. There is one insurance company. We now have 1,500 separate insurance companies. I think the very fundamental question that we as Americans are going to have to ask in terms of health care, do you want a health care system whose function is to provide the best quality health care to the people, to be deeply involved in preventative medicine so that we don't get sick, or do you want a system which is based on the profit motive, where a doctor looks at you and says, hey, you got a great disease. We could make at least $50,000 out of your disease. Okay? And you have drug companies who are ripping off people right and left. During the course of the campaign in Vermont, some pharmacists gave me some documents which were very interesting. I think it's pretty widely known that prescription drugs manufactured in the United States are sold in Canada and in Europe for significantly lower prices than they are in this country. Why is that? because the national health care systems tells these huge pharmaceutical companies, you know what, you can't rip off our people. You're not going to sell your product unless you give us a fair price. In this country, the drug companies get away with murder, and I should say literally murder. How many times I have talked as mayor of the city of Burlington to elderly people who said, Bernie, the choice I have to make is between high-cost prescription drugs or food. That is an outrage. Okay? So I think the basic question is, do we provide health care to people in a non-profit way, in a human way, or do we see it as another business in which certain people, the drug companies, the insurance companies, the AMA, and their friends, the medical equipment suppliers, are able to make tens of billions of dollars in profit? Very simple question that needs an enormous amount of debate.
Our next question comes from Palmyra, New Jersey.
Yes, Mr. Sanders, I had two questions. I have a slight frog here. One is with regards to our participation in the United Nations. Our country, as flawed as it is, still has a wonderful Bill of Rights and a Constitution. The UN Charter and the UN activities are not under that. They don't have rid of habeas corpus or what have you. It seems like we're going towards a new world order, which I think is sort of like monopoly statism. So we're going to have all the evils of the states put into a super state without the protections of our Constitution. Why are we being subjected to the will of a super state that doesn't have the same the protections of our own Bill of Rights?
Thank you.
Well, I don't think that most people, including myself, consider the United Nations to be a super state in which decisions of the United Nations preempt the individual rights of a particular country, the United States or any other country. Clearly, the function of the United Nations, and it's an enormously important body, and I hope, in fact, it gains more and more strength. We have got to finally, as we enter the 21st century, begin to understand that war is a human abomination, and that if nations have conflicts, there have got to be other ways to solve those conflicts, especially in the era of nuclear weapons and chemical weapons, other than killing each other. That means there has to be serious discussion. That means there has to be impartial bodies that help resolve disputes. So I think the function of the United Nations is to bring the countries of the world together where they can talk rather than kill, where disputes can be solved peacefully, and I very strongly support that process and the United Nations.
We haven't spent much time, and I have a caller, so I can't ask you to spend too much time on this, on what you believe the proper role of Congress in the Persian Gulf question would be.
I have very, very deep concerns about the direction that President Bush is taking this country. What Saddam Hussein did is clearly absolutely wrong. He has got to get out of Kuwait. He has got to free the hostages. And I have deep concerns about him and other dictators around the world having nuclear weapons or chemical weapons. I believe, however, that Saddam Hussein can be defeated and we can accomplish all of our goals without having to go to war and seeing tens of thousands of people killed and all kinds of other problems resulting because of that war. I believe that if we continue the effort to put strong economic pressure on him, diplomatic pressure, if it takes a year, if it takes 2 years, he will be defeated. And we will win, and the world will win, all of the goals that we are fighting for. But what deeply concerns me is not only the bloodshed and the huge cost. I want the president to go on television and tell the elderly people that if you go to war and it costs $50 billion or $100 billion, Social Security is going to be cut, Medicare is going to be cut, your property taxes are going up because they're going to cut back on every program that emanates from the federal government. I want him to go on television and tell people what that war will cost. But most importantly, I believe now that the Cold War is over, it is a horrible precedent to be the day after the Cold War ends to start another war against a third world nation. That crisis and that problem, in my view, can be solved peacefully, and I intend to play as strong a role as I can in solving it peacefully.
Riverview, Michigan.
Hi. I want to make one statement first before I ask a question. In my 65 years of being involved in politics and reading a lot about it, because I find it very interesting, I find it an important element in all of our lives. I've always been appalled at how other people seem to take such a little interest in it. They read something in the paper and they swallow it whole. They don't think about it. When I say I voted for Barry Colliner, people say, who is he? And I'm saying, hey, don't you read the paper? Don't you know what's going on in this world? From Latin America over to Europe to Middle East, people don't want to hear about it. They don't really care. How do you, I think it's wonderful that you were elected as an independent. How did you get people to be interested in this?
I don't think it's that people don't care. I really don't believe that. I think that people are in despair. How could you not care whether your kid gets a decent education? How could you not care if a company that you work for throws you out on the streets and takes that job to Mexico or Asia? How could you not care about if your kid is going to get called up to go to war and get killed, or if you can't afford health care? People care. We have got to ask ourselves why it is that in Europe and in Scandinavia, 80 or 90% of the people vote. They are much more knowledgeable about the issues of the day. They talk about politics in a much more serious tone than we do in our country. Time after time I talk to young people, students, they go to Europe and they come back and they say, oh my God, students in France know more about American politics than my fellow classmates know about it. I think it has to do with two basic reasons. Number one, the fact that the two major parties do not have any real philosophical or ideological difference. So there's not a clash of ideas. And I think, second of all, the role of the media. And I want to say that I think C-SPAN, by the way, does a very good job in allowing the people a much broader understanding of what's going on in this government than was previously the case. But you have to look at the major networks. Do you think that television in general, commercial television, is at all concerned about educating or informing our people? I don't think so. The function of commercial television is to make as much money as they can for the owners of the networks and for the people who advertise. You don't see that serious debate or serious programming on the environmental crisis, on the issues of war and peace. Occasionally you do. I don't want to be 100% harsh. But I think that the media in this country, the corporately owned media, does not do a good job of telling the people that the issues of the day are far more important than the murder shows or the rape shows or the sitcom shows. And I think that has got to be changed.
In Vermont, with a three-way race, what was the turnout in the state?
It was pretty high. I think it was almost 60%. I may be wrong, but it was pretty high.
Ventura, California.
Yes, congratulations, Congressman.
Thank you.
And my check's in the mail for your re-election. Real quick question. On banking, next term, they want to deregulate the banks again.
Right.
I was wondering, if they do regulate, then should we make it so that the taxpayer doesn't have to pay any of those insured deposits? Your views.
Well, I think, if you put, $5,000 in a bank, you have the right to know that it is being insured by the faith and credit of the United States government. To me, the basic issue in terms of banking is this. The money that is put in that bank belongs to the people of this country. And I think that the people should have a say as to how that money is invested. Should it be reinvested in our communities, in creating decent paying jobs? Should it be invested in affordable housing? Or should it be used for speculation and types of development projects which benefit the rich, for example? So to me, the key issue in terms of banking is to make sure that the money is used productively, that there's more democratic input into how our money is invested than is presently the case.
Burlington, Vermont.
Earl, I know that community.
Yes, Bernie, baby. I'm calling from Burlington, Vermont.
Yes, they know you too.
And I want to say, I'm one of those people that voted for you. And one of my questions was, well, two of them really, was have you decided or have they told you what committee that they actually are really focusing on putting you on? And again, the second question was, how are your feelings now being in Washington, being around the big guys who think they know everything down there and focusing on their own attentions? If you could tell me some of that, and I'll listen for your answer on the television. And again, hey, I'm glad you're there, man. Let's do it.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. It's nice to hear from the people back home. The first question is, in terms of committee assignment, they do not make that public and will not tell any new member, until January, to the best of my knowledge. In terms of the second question, how does it feel to be around all these big guys? Well, it's pretty interesting. You see all these guys on television all the time, and now you're suddenly in the room. In fact, it was an amazing experience. My wife and I went, the president invited us to the White House with all of the new members. It was a really strange experience. You're chatting with somebody, you look over your shoulder, there's the President of the United States. So I think what is important to me is to understand that a lot of what takes place in Congress, despite what many of the leaders may think, does not have a hell of a lot to do with reality. That in fact, the people back home, and I miss, believe me, I've been here already a week and I miss Vermont, we'll be going back in a few days. is not to get sucked into this process by which Washington is defining what's important, because I think they're wrong most of the time. And my roots are in my state, and I will stay as close to the people as I possibly can. You know, the most important fable that I've ever heard is the emperor without his clothes, and it has to do with who's crazy and who's not crazy, who's dealing with reality, who's not dealing with reality. And I think in Congress here, they're dealing with billions of dollars here and tens of billions of dollars there. I think they're very often missing the point. So I intend to stay in contact with the people back home, and in fact, try to develop some mechanisms by which on a regular basis, for example, putting together not just town meetings, but just, we did this in Burlington when I was mayor, just a methodology by which I've got to be subjected to what the people, you know, want from me, what their views are. My job is to represent the people of my state and not to forget where I came from.
We're out of time. Thank you for being with us this evening. Congressman-elect Bernie Sanders, independent, representing at large the state of Vermont. Have a good evening.